Good morning, everybody, or rather good afternoon. It is the afternoon here in the UK, although it is the morning in the United States, which is where our lessons in leadership is coming from today. So a warm welcome to everybody. Thank you for joining us for episode 41 of Lessons in Leadership, which is a global edition with Brian Formato, founder of Groove Management and LeaderSurf. Good morning or good afternoon, Brian. I'm all over the place with this today.
Yes, hi, Mary. It's good to be with you across the pond, and I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Oh, I'm looking forward to talking to you now. It's 8 o'clock in the US where you are, and it's about 12 o'clock here. I might have got my timings wrong, but that's whereabouts we are in the day. But I'm really excited to have you with me today and to have this conversation with you because we were introduced via Ryan Hartley, who was sharing with me about what you're doing with leadership in Costa Rica and things, and we'll come into that later. But what I'm just really, really interested in is what you've established over the years, having had a successful corporate career working with organizations such as Times Warner and Motley Fool. You're now running your own organizations, Groove Management, which I think is a fantastic name because that for me strikes the note of it. Let's all get into our groove, but also LeaderSurf as well. So I'm going to kick off just by inviting you to tell a bit more of your story as to how you got to be where you are today. What caused you to move out of the corporate world and establish, first of all, Groove Management?
Yeah, great. So it's I love talking about leadership and especially about my passion for developing people. So I think that's where it started. Was I spent 20 plus years working in a number of different corporations. You mentioned Time Warner, Motley Fool, Ingersoll Rand, Doosan, a Korean company that bought Bobcat, and so I've had a lot of global experience, and it was around really aligning people with strategy and the culture within organizations. And did a lot of 360 work, learned a lot about what it takes to be a successful and an effective leader, navigating a corporation. And what I found was that the way that we go about developing people in large organizations is really more about management than leadership. And it's about compliance. It's about getting people to toe the line. And what I found is that leadership is about individuality. It's about finding your groove, as I call it. So, my wife and I looked at each other back in 2014 and said, why are we both working for the man? One of us should go do something more entrepreneurial. And I said, I'm out. I really want to do this consulting thing and be able to have a broader impact on individuals and organizations. And while I was in graduate school back in 2000, we had to create a fictitious company and do some pro bono consulting. And at the time, we'd learned about a concept called appreciative inquiry. And the concept was around focusing on what's right versus what's wrong, what's working well. And I took the idea of appreciative inquiry and came up with this name for it, which is Groove Management, finding your groove.
I love that. And I love that it's based in appreciative inquiry, which is such a I've worked with appreciative inquiry. It's such a positive way to look at things within an organization and understand what is working around here, what we're doing really, really well. How much does that align to a strengths-based approach? There's lots of talk now.
I think this almost, to a degree, it predates when Strength Finder and all of that work started really get traction. But what I found was that, how do you differentiate yourself? One of the things I ask my clients is, what's your groove? What makes you better, special, or different as an individual or an organization? And so to walk the talk and, kind of practice what I preach, I kind of had to look at it and say, so what makes my organization better, special, or different than others? And so many consulting firms go into organizations looking for problems to solve. I approach it as, I go into an organization, I ask them, what is it that you guys do that nobody else does? What are the things that are your competitive advantage? And instead of having a conversation about deficits, we have a conversation about assets and strengths. And oftentimes there are things that they take for granted, don't recognize the actual power and the leverage they have in them. And then when you start dissecting the successes rather than dissecting the weaknesses, what you find is that many times there's a formula in there where you can replicate the success, and you can then use it to then solve, yes, the ills and the problems of an organization. But really coming in, looking at things through a positivity lens versus a negative lens is a differentiator for the way that we go about our business.
I think that's an absolutely fantastic way to go about it. And what I'm imagining as you're sharing this is the type of energy that you would have in that type of conversation where you're focusing on what's working as opposed to the type of energy you might have when you're focusing on what's not working.
Yeah.
I mean, it must be so much more engaging and energizing for people to be in that positive, let's look at what we're doing that's working here, that's right.
Yeah, I think it's a lot more fun for the audience. And especially if you go into an organization that feels like they're struggling, they've lost their mojo, if over the course of the past couple of years with the struggles through COVID and so forth, to find a few things that are working well and that are good that they can anchor upon really changes things.
Yes, yes. Really fantastic. So you set up groove management. I love the whole idea that's about find your groove, work with your strengths, work with what works for you. That is a great way to be approaching things. You set that up 19 years ago, and then 5 years ago, you set up LeaderSurf. So say a bit more about LeaderSurf.
Yeah, so back to all the work that I did around in the corporate world and then in my business for groove management, what I find is that leaders come in all sizes and shapes. And when you start to kind of dissect and say, is there a formula for leadership success? Do you have to be charismatic? Do you have to be articulate? Do you have to be positive? Like, what are the trait? Does trait theory apply to leadership? And I absolutely rule out the fact that it does. It does not. Like, leaders come in all sizes and shapes. They're narcissistic leaders that are super successful. There are humble, selfless leaders that are successful. So what is it makes for an effective leader? And the one thing that I've anchored on is self-awareness, that it's a matter of playing to your strengths. And one of the things that in this world of self-help books and all this like motivational stuff is that we tend to get people to read biographies and so forth so that they can try to emulate other people. And the problem with that is that if you try to be like somebody else to be an effective leader, you rob yourself of the individuality of the things that make you better, special, or different.
Yes.
So to me, leadership is a journey of self-awareness.
Yes.
And so if you're going to send people to a program and develop them as leaders, it's not about getting them to come out with a uniform set of skills. It's about each person going on a learning journey and coming out with their own individual ahas and notions about themselves and themselves. And so I was asked by a company that I had run an emerging leader program for, a classroom-based program. Their CEO said, can you do something for our executive team? We all have MBAs and we've been at this for a long time, but we've got some blind spots. We need some skill development. We need to get better at giving feedback and so forth. And I said, well, if I put you guys in a classroom and we tried to do like traditional leadership development, it'd be like sending you to a karaoke bar at 10 in the morning where the bar is closed and you just have to get up and sing with no alcohol. It would be so awkward. And I think that it would actually hurt the team dynamic, not help it. So they said to me, what do you suggest we do? And I said, I think we should send each person to a different program where they'd be exposed to people from other organizations and that they'd learn through the full experience. And they said, great, we'll pay you to help us identify those programs. And so it'd been a few years since I had to go out in the marketplace and see what was available through universities and through a number of different groups. And what I found was that curriculum has not changed in 30 years.
Wow.
And that it's really the same thing. You fill out a few assessments, you go to a conference center, somebody that is a professor that doesn't have a lot of real world work experience, but is more theoretical and from higher ed teaches the class. And it's about teaching and lecturing rather than engaging. And so I kind of looked at it and said that the model's broken. We need something that's much more centered around the learner versus around the teacher. And we sent people to these programs and they came back and I interviewed them afterwards and said, what did you get out of it? And they said, well, a nugget here or there, but the best part of the program wasn't the program. It was the people that I met from these different companies. And the best part was actually in the evenings when we'd have dinner together or we'd have a drink at the bar and we'd each talk about our work experience and the things that we're struggling with, and we would use each other as kind of a support network. So the thought was, could I build a program that actually was more about a learning circle and that each person would bring a business challenge to the program, and they'd use the other participants to share their challenges and use them almost as a mastermind group to solve problems.
Yes.
We do the assessment work. They get one-on-one coaching. I think of one of the important things in today's world about being a leader is to be selfless. And so this concept of servant leadership. So I said, well, what if we could do something around humanitarian aid, where we teach leaders that leadership is about giving to others? And so could we spend a day doing something in the community? Well, what community should that be? And so the idea of going to Central America, where there's a lot more aid work, seemed interesting. And then the idea that, hey, when are you at your best? And it's when you're comfortable and you can let your guard down. And that's when you're in shorts and flip-flops and a t-shirt and at the beach. So why not do this at the beach? And then I said, well, we also need an outlet. We need something physical for people to do. And surfing has been a passion of mine since I was a little kid. And so I started thinking about the intersection between my passion and my profession. So, well, what if we did a daily surfing lesson? What are the learnings that you get from teaching executives to surf? The thing is, executives tend to stay in their comfort zone, doing the things they're already good at. But leadership is about being vulnerable, opening oneself up. And the best leaders in the world wipe out every time, or best surfers in the world wipe out every time they get in the water. So could we put executives in a position where they had to actually be vulnerable, try something they had never done before, and embrace failure as learning? And so that's where the concept for LeaderSurf.
So how do you actually run that then? Because what I'm imagining is, traditionally training, you do it as part of a group, and I imagine kind of asking a group of leaders to get in the water and start surfing. It's going to take a bit more than that, isn't it? So how do you actually conduct the program?
It does. So there's an entire kind of orientation journey, which starts with, we don't share who's coming to the program in advance. The only rules are no two people from the same organization. So everybody comes to this program, 6 to 10 participants, not knowing anyone else. And they meet at the airport and get onto a van for a 2-hour ride where I'm not there. And they start to assimilate and get to know each other on that van. We make certain that they don't have LinkedIn profiles and access to each other in advance. So it's like showing up to a new school on day one. You can be anyone you want for the week. You have to introduce yourselves to each other. And then once we start off with kind of expectations for the week, orientation, and I call it the high five. Can we do this? The high five approach. And so we start with the high five. So first one, little finger, safety first, right? It's the most fragile finger. So you have to be careful about, your physical and your emotional safety throughout the week. The second finger, the ring finger, right, is about commitment. Be committed to where you are for the week and focus on it. The middle finger, we never lift it alone. And so it's about respect for one another, respect for the environment. The index finger used for pointing. Just remember that if you point, you've got 4 fingers pointing back at you. And so it's really about, making certain that you're not assigning blame. And then the thumbs up is about being positive for the week. So
I just love that. I love the simplicity of it and the metaphor of just using your hand.
And then the high five, which is, let's celebrate each other. And so that's kind of the framework for the week. And then when we get down to the beach for the first lesson, we actually don't go in the water. The first surfing lesson starts with, in business, we don't teach people how to fail. Failure is, there we go.
Yeah, failure, we nearly had a, not sure what happened there.
One option in business, but in surfing, failure is a requirement. So teaching people that there's a right and a wrong way to fall. And that when you fall off a surfboard, you put your hands up over your head so you don't get hit by the board and so forth. So we have this conversation around, what if you taught people how to fail in business, because it's going to happen, and that there's lessons and learnings from it. And then we talk about scanning the horizon. You wouldn't start a new business or launch a product without scanning the horizon. What's the competitive landscape look like? So what's the ocean look like? Is it calm? Do the waves come in a certain pattern? And so it's really about learning to read the water, much like you'd have to learn to read the landscape in a business. And then we talk about the fact that you can't control the waves, that the waves can control you, much like you can't control your employees. And so if you try to manipulate your employees and control them, they'll rebel against you. But if you figure out a way to harness their power, you can get so much more out of them. And so the idea is that when you do go in the ocean and learn to surf, you're actually putting yourself in a position to harness the power of the ocean. And you don't catch the wave catches you. And
I
so,
love that. It's kind of working with the elements, like, you know, the whole VUCA thing that we've been through in the last 20 months, unexpected, the pandemic, you know, the whole thing about agile leadership. It's like working with rather than pushing against is what I'm hearing.
Yeah. And then the other piece that really was almost unintended that came out of when I ran the first program was two things. The mantra for the program became paddle, paddle, paddle. And it was this idea that you got to keep moving, and that surfing is less about standing on the board and riding the wave, and it's more about paddling. And so it's this notion of it's a lot of hard work for a few seconds of glory, but much like everything in life, the success only comes after you put in the effort and the work.
Yes.
And so one of the surf instructors would say to each person, paddle, paddle, paddle all the time. And so just keep yourself moving, and especially through the pandemic, it's paddle, paddle, paddle. You have
absolutely, yeah, great analogy. I love the whole metaphor of learning to surf and the ocean and everything. It's so appropriate and pertinent for leadership.
So it's been a passion play. It's been a lot of fun. Unfortunately, because of the pandemic, I haven't been able to do a program now. In November it'll actually be 2 years because I just haven't been able to get people out. I've done some virtual things. I've done some speaking engagements. I had a webinar about a month ago with the CEO of the World Surf League, which is a governing body behind professional surfing. The chief heart officer for VaynerMedia, which is a big media company, and she used to be a surf instructor, and then one of the previous participants from LeaderSurf. And it was really leadership and surfing, and what are the lessons that you can learn from it? Because I do think that as a sport, there are a lot of parallels between surfing and leadership and surfing and business. And that stigma of the surfer dude, mentality or surfer chick has kind of gone out the window. There's a lot of successful professionals that surf.
And well, there is something about surfing the waves of change, isn't there? Because change does come in waves. So learning to surf that is a great capability.
Yeah.
So when have you got? You've obviously been hamstrung by the pandemic to a certain degree, but I presume you've got more courses coming up in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, there was going to be one this fall, and we've kind of hit pause on that. So we have two different options. One is an open enrollment program, and so the next one will probably be in January at this point.
Yeah.
So we have to see what happens with Delta.
Yeah.
And that'll be in Costa Rica. But then in addition to that, we've had several conversations with companies that, if you want safe social distancing, this is an opportunity to bring a team and do your own cohort program where we can customize. And there's strict protocols to get to Costa Rica from a vaccination standpoint. But once you're there, all the classroom work we do is outside under a tiki hut. And so you really have the opportunity to bring a team together for a week where you can do real work and have some lessons and so forth. And so we're in conversation with several companies about using the program as a way to bring people back together.
Fantastic. And I think what's great about all of that is that it will bring things out subconsciously for people. So you're working with people's subconscious rather than, any sort of classroom knowledge-based thing. This is much more of an experiential journey that people are on.
So when I was an undergraduate, the school I went to, Eckerd College, was a campus for the Center for Creative Leadership. And so I got to be a student facilitator and go through some of the program stuff, and then help to facilitate when executives would come down, some of the team building and the icebreaker things. And I am very much an experiential learner myself. And so every time I run a workshop with executives, whether it's on Zoom or in person, I always start with an icebreaker activity. And I feel like we learn more through doing than we do through talking about things that we're reading about them. And so I've been grounded in that concept of experiential learning.
Yes, fantastic. Well, you've already shared so much about leadership and how leaders learn and what's the best way to learn. Fantastic. But I'm also interested in your own personal story as well, which is why I run these conversations, because it is lessons in leadership. So I'd really like to hear a bit more about a time that you might have struggled. You might have been navigating some stormy weather or whatever. I'd love to hear more about your story and what you did and how you were in dealing with those circumstances and sharing your own lessons.
I'll tell you, so there are two pieces to this. One was When I was about 30 years old, I was the director of HR for a medical group, and had the opportunity to interview for a head of HR job for a large publicly traded company, and made it to the final round and was flown up to Boston to meet with the CEO of the company. And I get into his office, and we do some small talk, and then he asked me a question that completely threw me for a loop. And the question was, what do you want to learn? And my answer to him was, well, I'm here to provide you with my HR expertise, my knowledge of motivating employees and so forth. And he said, no, I don't want to know what you bring to the organization. I want to know what you want to learn. And I said, well, I want to learn your business so I can do better at what I do. And I did not get the job. And I was, and looked at it and kind of pointed fingers and said, well, he was a jerk. And that was a stupid question. In hindsight, it was probably one of the most powerful questions I've ever been asked, because this idea of being a lifelong learner and on this journey is that, every day we learn new things. And in the LeaderSurf program, we end each day with something called Sunset Reflections, where each person has to share something they learned about themselves or the world that they didn't know when they woke up in the morning. And so that question at the time frustrated me, because I hadn't looked at the world through that lens of learning. And instead, I looked at it through the lens of, I'm being hired for my expertise, not for my ability and desire to continue to learn and grow.
Yes.
And where it really helped the most was when I started Groove Management. I left my corporate job. I hung up my shingle, open for business. I sent an email blast to everybody that I knew saying, I'm now running this consulting room and I'd love to work with you. And I heard crickets. Like, nobody responded. And I'm out there now, hoping that this is going to be my future, and nothing's happening. And I wasn't sure what to do and how to go about building the business. And now I work with a number of entrepreneurs and startups, and I recognize that determination, tenacity, hard work, right, and a learning mindset are the keys to being an effective CEO or entrepreneur. And patience is the other one. And so I learned that this patience, perseverance, and continuing to kind of read the landscape and learn how to evolve is what ultimately led me to having the right conversations that led to getting traction.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that. It's such a pertinent share, really, because, and my question to build on what you just shared is, you mentioned the whole keeping a learning mindset, which I absolutely concur is completely so important. But when the chips are down and you're really feeling under the cosh, it can be very hard sometimes to keep our mindsets open. What helped you during that difficult time?
So number one, my spouse, my wife.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, so having a support network and having people that believe in you, and then having outlets. So having hobbies and things that you enjoy doing. So I'm a water sports person. And so being able to get out on a paddleboard or go surfing, things that I love. And one of the things that was interesting was that my daughter was, in middle school at the time. And I took the opportunity, instead of putting her on the bus, to drive her to school every day. And so while I wasn't as busy work-wise, I had this amazing opportunity and time with her every morning.
Wow.
Listening to the radio, singing songs, getting, connected with her. And she's off to college now. And it's like, when I look back to that time, it was like, I cherish it. And I used the 10 minutes to drive her to school. The most important part was the drive home, because I was working from home at the time, and I actually had a commute. So I had 10 minutes to drive home to get in the headspace of, when I get back in my house at my desk, I'm in my office as if I've commuted to a work office, and I'm going to hit the ground running. And so having a cadence, was the other thing that really helped me in terms of building a repertoire for how you would approach each day. There wasn't a boss or anyone that was making certain I was at work. And so you had more freedom that you could be undisciplined. And so that discipline and so forth, and doing the right things, over time, it led to enough outbound and enough outreach that I started getting traction with clients.
I also hear you practiced what you preached as well. So you started off our conversation talking about appreciative inquiry, and actually the challenging time that you went through actually caused you to appreciate what you had right in front of you, and that caused you to develop the relationship with your daughter as you did, which is fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. So
yeah. Lovely. Well, listen, we are almost out of time already. It goes by so quickly. So, you know, I know in the US you might be on a slightly different timeline to how we are in the UK, but we are out of lockdown at the moment, and we hope that with the vaccination program here, we're getting on top of things. But we're still living in very uncertain times. So, I just wonder what your parting words of wisdom are for our listeners, our watchers.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think you have to anchor on the positive things. You know, and once again, back to the appreciative inquiry, see the things that are working well, the ability to spend more time with friends and family during, you know, lockdown, to work on projects that you hadn't worked on. One of the things I do a lot of work around resilience, and resilience, it's a muscle that gets developed, you know, through the fact that you're going through hardship. And so part of it is that I think an organization is only as resilient as the people leading it. And so, yeah, this idea of going through adversity enables people to come out of it stronger than they were before. And so you have to look at this as a learning opportunity.
Yes.
And the world will be forever changed. I mean, you know, you and I probably wouldn't have connected this way had it not been for COVID. And I've found that my business has grown in different ways. I've done coaching and work, you know, with clients all over the world that they wouldn't have paid to fly me to Germany to do a workshop, or work with a senator in California and so forth. And so I see it as, you know, we have brighter days ahead. But while we're in this, you know, we've got to ride the waves of the storm.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you so much, Brian. I'm sitting here. I love what you've shared today, and I'm conscious there's so much more we could have talked about as well. So, you know, we haven't even really delved into the Costa Rica, what you do over there in more depth today. So I definitely would like to have you back on another, beyond lessons in leadership. I'm going to be doing something else. So I'd definitely like to have you back as another guest if you'd be willing to come and join me.
Absolutely. Would love to. Well, I enjoyed talking with you today.
Thank you. And thank you to everyone who's been watching today. Do leave your comments. We always try our best to answer every single comment that gets left. Or if you're watching and catch up, please leave a comment. And again, we will respond to it as well. Next week, we actually have Ryan Hartley. I just realized it's Ryan Hartley next week from Always Better Than Yesterday. Another person who in these COVID times has certainly really inspired me from the leadership perspective. So I'm very much looking forward to interviewing him. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Brian. And we'll see you all next week. Bye-bye for now.